Good morning, guys, or good afternoon, whether you're joining me from the present or the future. Welcome back to another FutureFight Vanguard video. If you guys checked out my last video that just dropped, which is the reindeer video, at the very beginning, I explained why I haven't made videos in a little while. I also posted on the Facebook page. So I do want to say I'm sorry for that, guys. I will try to be more diligent in the future now that, some of my emotions are out of the way about the situation. But yeah, let's get right into the deck. Couple things before we get right into it is I will be making a second YouTube channel soon, so I will be making an announcement about that soon. So keep your eyes peeled and keep your ears curled. I don't know where I was going with that, but yeah, definitely keep a lookout for the second YouTube channel. Should be very up soon. I'm gonna make a lot of key decisions about it this Friday, so you guys should know a lot more about that maybe next Monday, if I'm lucky. But yeah, let's get right into the deck list. So we're speeding through the Bermuda set so that we can catch up to what people want to see now without leaving other people behind that want to see old stuff. So let's talk about the Prism deck that came out of the Bermuda set. And what you can do with it, types of things that you can accomplish, turns that you can do, combos that you can make, and let's get right into it. So first, in our grade 3s, we have 4 brand new Prism Glitter Emerald. What Glitter Emerald does is it's our new main ride target in this deck, and it accomplishes a couple different things for us. Besides being a good looking card, it does a couple things that allow us to kind of play the deck better. It has 2 abilities. The first ability being a Vanguard ability only, and the skill is when you ride on this unit. So basically when you ride on top of it or when you stride, you can counterblast 1. If you do, you choose one of your Vanguards, and until the end of the turn, it gets an ability. The ability that it gains being when this unit attacks, choose up to 2 of your rear guards, return them to your hand, and then if 2 cards were returned, choose a card from your hand and call it to the rear guard circle. So this skill basically just allows you to, when you're attacking, kind of mess with your attack patterns, throw off your opponent a little bit. Just allows you to, get a lot of stuff done in the turn, put a lot of pressure on your opponent, and just try to, do all that you can to win the game against your opponent, maybe 2 or 3 turns. The second ability is the Limit Break 4, which means that you have to be at 4 or more damage, obviously. You have during your turn, all of your units with Prism and its card name gets plus 4,000 for each critical on it, which means that, for every critical, every damage that it would do, it gets 4,000, which obviously the more dangerous the attack, the higher power the attack, which also makes it twice as dangerous. So it does a really good job of doing that, but also your stride can now snatch skills. So your stride can now take skills from your grade 3, so that's really good that that card has that ability, because your stride is able to snatch it easily, and it does make a big impact when you're attacking your opponent and trying to put pressure on your opponent. Our second grade 3 in the deck is 3 Prism Image Vert. It has a Limit Break 4 ability that we never really use, but it really depends on the scenario. If you ride it first, you can use it if you want to. If not, it doesn't really matter. But the ability is when a Bermuda Triangle unit rides on top of this unit, draw a card and choose up to 2 of your Bermuda Triangle rear guards and return them to your hand. Then you choose your Vanguard, and that unit gets plus 10,000 power. Not really that useful, just because you never have a real scenario where you want to ride on top of your grade 3 and just stay on top of your grade 3, unless you just want to draw a card, which there's no real need to just draw 1 card. Just to sacrifice a 1-for-1, which you're losing 1 to ride, and then you're riding on top of it. So not a real use for it. Besides, the reason why we run it is because we can search it with Sunshine Clear. It's very good for that, just like searching a grade 3, putting a crit back into our deck. Pretty good. And then we also have Sunshine Vert, so if we are on Vert for any reason, we can Sunshine Vert our opponent and then try to ride over and have a more powerful turn. The second and third ability is, the third ability is Lord, which means that it can't attack unless we have a unit with the same clan as this unit on the field. The only thing that this really prevents is when you're playing against Nubatama. Really, they rename you play Verts, and they just can't attack you with them because they have Lord. Other than that, they don't really serve a real purpose of having Lord, because every card in your deck is Bermuda, so that's not really a problem. And then the second ability is during your turn, if the number of Bermuda Triangle rearguards you have is 4 or more, this unit gets plus 2,000 power. It really only helps in the early game. Put a little pressure on your opponent if you ride a grade 3 before them, but if not, it doesn't really matter. Moving on, we have one brand new Prism Garnet. It's one of our grade 3 cards. It's an older card, but not old enough to be irrelevant. So that's why we only run one. So it has a limit break 4 Vanguard ability. It says when this unit attacks a Vanguard, choose up to 3 cards with Prism in its name from your hand and call it to rearguard circle. If you call 3 cards until the end of the battle, it gets a limit break 5 ability that says this unit gets +1 drive. So the very sucky thing about this card is that if you do use the ability to gain the limit break 5 and you happen to heal in the middle of its drive checks, you will not get the 3rd drive. So unfortunately, they didn't really account for that when Bushiroad made this card, or maybe they did account for it and they just thought it would be too powerful at the time, so they decided to nerf it a little in that way. But you also have a skill that gives your limit break 5 abilities, turns them into limit break 4, so maybe even if you heal out of it, it won't really affect you as often or as prominently as it would have before. But the second ability is when your unit is returned to the hand from your rearguard circle, you can counterblast a Prism card. If you do, choose one of your units and it gets plus 5,000 power, so not really much of a skill, but enough to cause an impact, enough to change a guard number, enough to take more of out of your opponent's hand. Then moving on to our grade 2s, we have 4 Prism Promise Princess Celtic. So what Princess Celtic does is when this unit's attack hits a Vanguard, you can counterblast a Prism card, which every card in your deck is Prism, except for Shandi, so you don't really have to worry about that, but you probably will have a Prism counterblast to use. But when this unit's attack hits a Vanguard, counterblast a Prism card. If you do, choose one of your other rearguards, return it to your hand, and if you return a card this way, then you draw a card. So easy way to get advantage over your opponent, to start speeding up the game against your opponent if they let this hit. On grade 2 is just especially dangerous, especially if you can play multiples and your opponent crits you or something, so you have multiple ways to do it, or multiple counterblasts to use. Just very useful all around. Then we have one Prism Rare Lumiere. So Lumiere is just a 12k attacker. When it attacks, it doesn't even have to attack Vanguard. We just have to have a Vanguard with Prism in its name. So assuming that we're grade 2 or greater, we're going to have a Prism Vanguard, assuming that we can even play this card. So in the conditions that this card would be on the board, you will always have a Prism Vanguard. So you don't have to worry about it. It will always be a 12k attacker. Not much of a big deal. Then let's talk about our last grade 2, which is 3 Prism Image Sunshine Rosa. Sunshine Rosa is when your other rearguard is, or when your other unit is bounced from your hand to the rearguard circle. From your hand or to your hand from the rearguard circle. If you have a Vanguard with limit break 4, you can soul blast 1 and choose one of your other units, and this unit and that unit get plus 3,000 power. So you basically bounce a unit, but you keep this on the board, and then you give 2 units power, which can sometimes change a guard number, sometimes it doesn't. It just really depends. It definitely changes the guard number if you have a Lumiere boosted by something. Otherwise, it doesn't really change the guard number unless you've already used like Princess late and given something 4k, or Clear given something 4k. Then moving on to our grade 1s, we have 2 Preserving Talent Shandi. Shandi is basically just a stride fodder in this deck. We basically just use it to discard for stride fodder. Not much to say beyond that. Like, this is not a lore deck, so we don't run it for the first ability, only for the second ability. Then we have 4 PGs, which is brand new Prism Flash Sapphire. We got this card out of this set. Pretty awesome card. As Sentinel, which means that you can't run more than 4 Sentinels in general in your deck. You guys know that already. The second ability is when this unit is placed on guard circle from the hand, you can choose a card from your hand and discard it. If you do, choose one of your units with Prism in its name, and that unit cannot be hit. So perfect guards your attack. You can perfect guard Vanguard or rearguard as long as it has Prism in the name, which any important units that you're probably trying to PG probably have Prism in the name anyways, so you don't have to worry about that as much. And then it also has a drop zone ability that says bind this card face up and choose one of your Vanguard's limit break 5 abilities, and it changes to limit break 4 until the end of the turn. So we mainly want to use this on our Shining Garnet. Not much to say about that, but Shining Garnet's limit break 5 ability is very, very powerful, so we do want to make it limit break 4 most of the time so that we don't have to heal out of it. We literally have to double heal and our opponent has to be at 4 for us to get out of it, which if we double heal, that's great. But if we heal out of it and we're at 5 and we go down to 4, that's not as great, and we still want to use that pressure to try to finish off our opponent. Then we have 4 Prism Duo Loretta. So what Loretta does is she allows you to use Limit Break 4 even when you have 3 damage or less, as long as she's on the rearguard circle. So kind of helps a little bit. It just really depends on the early game, how the early game goes, Glitter Emerald, etc. But this does allow you to have your Shining Garnet active at all times as long as you've used Flash Sapphire and you have Loretta on the board, because it changes your Limit Break 5 to a Limit Break 4, and then your Limit Break 4 is able to be used at any time, no matter how much damage you have. So that makes your Garnet Star or your Shining Garnet like active at any time, and it's really dangerous for your opponent for them to have this stay on the field, just because it allows you to do so many things in this deck. Then we have 2 Prism Promise Princess Late. So what Princess Late does is when this unit is returned to your hand from the rearguard circle, if you have a Vanguard with Prism in its name, countercharge 1, soul charge 1, choose one of your other units and it gets plus 4,000 power, and then you cannot normal call this card for the rest of the turn. But you can call it by the effects of other cards. So what this means is that this is our resource refresh engine. So we want to refund our resources whenever we use our card skills, our counter blasts, our soul blasts, etc. This helps you get over that. But this is also a really good defensive tool, because if you happen to bounce it during your opponent's turn, which is why we run 2 hand-in-hand Leona, the G-Guard, you can bounce it and countercharge 1, soul charge 1 during your opponent's turn and actually get 4k to your Vanguard, so that your Vanguard can be 15k for the rest of the turn. If you can manage to bounce more than 1, that's more power to you. Kind of the, the same thing. You can also use Sunshine Rosa if it's on the board to give your Vanguard 3k and 3k as long as Sunshine Rosa is on the board when late is being bounced. So this deck can be very offensive and very defensive at the same time, so it can definitely hold its own against some of the more offensive pressure decks out there. Then we have 2 Prism Image Clear. That's what I assume the I stands for. But Prism Eye Clear, its skill is when it's returned to the hand from rearguard circle. Kind of the same thing as late, but instead it costs a Soul Blast, and then you give one of your Bermuda Triangle rearguards 4k, or just a unit actually 4k. You just choose the Bermuda Triangle card, it gets 4k. So obviously on a defensive turn you would choose Vanguard. On an offensive turn you would want to increase whatever changes the number for your opponent to guard more. Then for our starter, we have 1 Prism Smile Koro, Prism S Koro. It has Pioneer, which is what Forerunner used to be called. It's basically just the exact same as Forerunner, which means that when you ride upon it, it can move to any rearguard circle. Not much to say about that. You just ride to grade 1 and then you move it back anywhere you want. It's just a free plus, and it gives you something to start off with at the beginning of the game. And also, when your Bermuda Triangle rearguard is returned to your hand from rearguard circle, you can also bounce this card to your hand. So in this deck, this card has no real purpose for, bouncing the hand. Like, there's no combos like that increase your power by bouncing a bunch of cards to hand or stuff like that. But you do want to bounce this card to your hand just to get a little more buffer in between you and your opponent. Allows you to guard for bigger. You can just hold in your hand forever. For a long time until you're ready to use it against your opponent, and they might or might not expect it, because they might or might not have forgotten that you bounced it to your hand. But going into our triggers, we actually run rainbow triggers, so we run 4 crits, 4 stands, 4 draws, and 4 heals. All of our cards have abilities pretty much except for the heal, but we do run 4 Sunshine Clear as our crit. Sunshine Clear skill is when it's returned to the hand from the rearguard circle. If we have a Vanguard with Prism in its name, we can counterblast 1 and choose a Sunshine Clear from our hand and reveal it and return it to the deck. And then if we do, we can search a Vert, Rosa, or Clear card from our deck, call it to rearguard circle, and then if we want to, we can choose to bounce this card immediately to hand. So it allows you to get cards that you need. If you need a Stride Fodder, obviously get your Vert. If you need a grade 2, you can get Rosa. If you need Clear for a defensive play, you can get Clear. But at the same time, you're returning a crit to your deck, so that's making it much more efficient on your side, because you're grabbing a card out of your deck that would be useless to check, and then putting a card back into your deck that would be amazing to check. Then we have 4 Prism M, I think it's Prism Miracle Irish. So what Irish does is when this unit is returned to your hand from Rearguard Circle, it does the same thing as Clear. You Soul Blast 1, and you choose one of your other Bermuda Triangle units, and it gets 4K. So basically, if you don't have a Clear, if you're lacking Clear, you can actually just play the stand trigger to the board, and if you're preparing to make a big defensive play with hand-in-hand Leona, you can actually bounce Irish, call Irish back against the Vanguard attack, and then have your opponent or have yourself gain 7K to the Vanguard Circle for an 18K base if you have roads on the field and you have 2 cards of Soul Blast. So that can be pretty good. And then we have 4 Sweet Prism Nayloon as our draw trigger. Nayloon's skill is Generation Break 1, which is kind of unprecedented in this deck because this deck usually doesn't have Generation Break 1 abilities. It's a very early game deck that goes off from the instant that you hit Grade 2 or Grade 3, just depending on what you have in your hand. But this card is Generation Break 1, so you do have to wait a little later to use it. But when this unit is returned to your hand from Rearguard Circle during your battle phase, you can Soul Blast 1 and choose one of your rearguards with Prism in its name, and it gets an ability that says at the end of the battle that this unit attacked or boosted, you can return this card to your hand. So this allows you to bounce a lot more cards than you would prefer. Maybe in some situations, like it just really depends. You can switch up your attack formation, use cards like Garnet, and make them a lot more useful, calling cards the Rearguard Circle if that card is able to bounce itself. So you really just want to pick and choose the times wisely that you use that card, because sometimes you can bounce more than intended, sometimes you don't bounce enough, and that's when you need to use Nayloon to bounce more cards. Then for our heal trigger, we run 4 Prism Miracle Timor. Timor is mainly just run because it's a Prism card. We can't really run the new heal trigger just because it interferes with our all Prism deck, and we don't want to do that in a deck that has an archetype, because usually that just means bad things. Moving into our G-Zone, we have our Ultimate Stride for Magalania, which is Zeroth Dragon of Distance C Megiddo. So Megiddo is our Ultimate Stride. Couple things to be aware of. I have mentioned this in past videos, but a couple things to be aware of is you can only go into this card when you have 3 or more cards face up in your G-Zone. You can only go into this card if you discard the same card that is on your Vanguard Circle to go into it. And then also, if you fail to kill your opponent during the turn, your entire G-Zone will be removed from play. So it's basically like a card that you only want to go into if you're sure that you can finish them off, or if you can't do anything else, literally, and you want to try to finish them out on that turn. So the skill is when this unit is placed on Vanguard Circle, counterblast 2. If you do choose up to 5 cards in total from your hand and drop zone, call them a separate Rearguard Circle until the end of the turn. They get plus 5,000 power, and then they get a skill that says at the end of the battle this unit was attacked, choose one of your other rearguards and you may exchange positions with this unit. So basically allows you 5 attacks outside of your actual stride. If you're including your stride attack, you get 6 attacks, and that's not including if you hit like stand triggers or anything that would allow you additional attacks via skills. So then we have our new stride that I've been talking about a lot in this video, which is brand new Prism Shining Garnet. Shining Garnet is our stride that I was talking about that can snatch skills, so to speak. It has 2 abilities. The first ability is counterblast 1 and choose a Shining Garnet in your G-Zone that's face down and turn it face up. And then you choose an ability of your heart card with Prism in its name, and this unit gets that ability. So you can actually just steal abilities a lot. Usually you're on your grade 3 Glitter Emerald, so you want to choose the Limit Break 4 ability usually and steal that one, because it does make it super useful for your rearguards to be hitting for really big. So combined with the critical amount, like those 2 just pair really, really well. Like that card, that skill gives 4,000 to each of your units for every critical. This card, when it's Limit Break 5, or if you use the skill to change it to Limit Break 4 and below, then you can actually have all of your units with Prism in its name get +1 critical, which means all of your units have 2 crit, and then they're also swinging +8 for every column. So every column is +16 if you have something that can actually boost, which is really, really good. Really good to pressure your opponent into a bad scenario, and really easy for your opponent to mess up and miscalculate how much that it's going to be, especially if you check a stand trigger or something like that. Your opponent suddenly can't block it and they take 2 crit and they might die from it. Then we have our next stride, which is 2 Prism Promise Princess Labrador. So what Princess Labrador does is it has an activation skill. It says flip a Princess Labrador face up from your G zone. If you have a heart card with Prism in its name, choose up to 2 of your rear guards, and they get 5,000 power in the skill. And the skill is that when it attacks or boosts until the end of the battle, at the end of the battle, they can return the card to their hand. So basically, you give plus 5,000 to 2 front rows. I would usually do. And then you can get those 2 front rows out of harm's way. If your opponent's playing control or something like that, you can just kind of duck out of the fight and do like hit and run tactics against your opponent so that they can't affect your most valuable cards very soon or very early on. And then you can also trigger a lot of effects that we have in this deck that activate from bouncing back to hand, so you can actually just target those cards that would bounce back to hand and then proc their effects when they bounce back to hand. So really good. Then we have 2 Prism Image Sunshine Vert. Sunshine Vert is a Limit Break 4 card, so do be careful that you can heal out of this card. I would really go into this card only when I'm at 5 damage and my opponent's at 5 damage, or when my opponent's just at 5 in general and I'm like Limit Break 4 or higher, just because I can't heal out of it. Because when you heal out of it, things get really sad because the skill's not active anymore and you can't proceed about your turn the way that you were intending to, which always sucks a lot when you can't do that. So this skill is at the end of the battle that this unit attacked a Vanguard. If you have a heart card with Prism in its name, you can choose a Sunshine Vert from your G zone, turn it face up, and then choose 3 cards from your hand and discard it. If you do, choose up to 2 of your rear guards with Prism in its name, return them to your hand. Put this card face up in the G zone, and then choose 1 grade 3 card with Prism in its name and ride it as stand. So you basically want to, all the time, if you can, ride Garnet, because that's the best card to ride after doing Sunshine Vert. If not, ride Glitter Emerald or Vert so that you can use, Glitter Emerald is preferred just because you can stride on top of it and ride on top of it and still have your abilities be really good. But if not, it's kind of just up to you. Like, it's up to your preference of how you want to do things, your attack order, how you try to flaunt your opponent to guarding your attacks. It's really all player preference. So then we have 2 Orient Prism Kaname. So what Kaname does is when this unit attacks, if you have a heart card with Prism in its name, you can counterboss 1 and flip a card with the same name as this unit, and then you choose 2 of your rear guards, return them to your hand. And then if you do, choose 2 cards with Prism in its name from your hand for each face-up card in your G zone and call them to separate rear guard circle. And then if you call 3 or more cards, this unit gets +1 critical. So, it's basically like an Olivia for Prisms. I feel like every Bermuda archetype has pretty much gotten an Olivia of their own. Like the actual Olivia card is just very useless nowadays unless you're running a generic deck that doesn't have an Olivia of their own. But this card is basically Olivia. Just allows you to bounce any amount of cards, call any amount of cards back. It is better than Olivia in the fact that you can bounce a lot of cards with the same name, so that's why we're running it over Olivia. But it has the same cost and everything literally, so you can literally just think of it as the Prism Olivia card. Then we have 1 Perfect Performance and just a counter Link Joker, get us out of that matchup or get us out of some tough matchup where we have to refocus our build or position our board, or maybe even just use some of our bounce to hand skills to refresh, like Princess Late and things like that nature. But it has a Generation Break 2 act ability that's once per turn. It says counterboss 2 and choose a G unit from your G zone and turn it face up. Then you choose any number of cards from any fighter circle other than Vanguard circle and return them to your hand. This unit gets +5,000 for each returned card until the end of the turn. And if you return 5 or more cards, you draw a card. And if you return 7 or more, this unit gets +1 drive. So most of the time when you play this card on the board, you just want to fill up your board as much as you can and then bounce all of your cards and then bounce all of your opponent's cards, unless there's going to be something that you're bouncing on your opponent's side that's either going to cause a negative interaction for you or make your opponent able to guard your attack. Like if they have a PG on the board, don't bounce that because they might survive it just because you bounce the PG to their hand. If they have like certain dangerous things on board, like a heal trigger or something like that they can use the G guard, don't bounce it to their hand because you're only going to be helping them really in the end, unless you have a specific plan revolving around bouncing that card. But otherwise, I just wouldn't bounce it. but most of the time you get to bounce 7 or more. Your opponent usually has 2 or more cards on the board that you can bounce, especially if you're playing against Link Joker, which is really the only scenario that we go into this card anyway. So, you know, there's that. And then you will attack for super big. We run crits in this deck. We run stands in this deck. So it's quad drive, so it can hurt your opponent pretty bad depending on what you check. Moving on to our G guards, we have one Best Sparkle Sandy. This is our Generation Break 1 G-Flip G-Guardian that Bermuda's got in the Fighters collection a while back. The skill is when it's placed on guard circle, if you're Generation Break 1 already, you can choose a G-Guard from your G-Zone and turn it face up. If you do, this unit gets plus 5,000 shield for every 2 cards in your hand, and then you can counter blast 1 to give it plus 5,000 more on top of the shield that it already has. So obviously the more cards that you have in your hand, the more power that it will gain. And then if you need a little more oomph to guard your opponent's attack, or you just want to no pass it from a 3 to pass, or whatever the case may be, if you need more shield, you can just pop a counter blast and go ahead and give your G Guardian plus 5k more shield. Moving on, we have 2 hand-in-hand Leona for the same reason that I discussed earlier in the deck build. We have a lot of cards in this deck that have skills that activate when they bounce to hand. Those skills being Sunshine Rosa, Princess Late, Clear, Sunshine Clear, Irish, Nellen. So basically you can choose any of those cards and just be very careful with them. But then you can also choose which abilities you want to use, and they can proc after you're done using Leona. So if you're being on a defensive turn, obviously the best things to bounce are Irish, Clear, or Princess Late, because they'll give power to your Vanguard for, you know, whatever the cost is. And then you can also choose a card from your hand and guard with it, and then if you guard with the same card, it gets plus 5,000 shield. So you can make really big guard amounts, anything from like 26 to, I believe, 31 or 46, or 36, 41, or 46. So you can make really big guard numbers with hand-in-hand Leona. Just use it very wisely. Then we have one Highest Society Citron. Pretty much run one in every Bermuda deck. Like sometimes we don't have a board. We want to be able to, you know, have stuff for free. So you can actually make a 41k shield really easily with this card by playing a grade 1 or greater card, specifically playing a grade 2 to an open rearguard circle in the front row, and then you can intercept immediately with it and make it a 41k guard. So really just there to guard for big amounts when you can't guard with anything else, because you either A, don't have a board, or you're not Generation Break 1 to be able to use Sandy, or you don't want to waste your G guards like that. But that has been the deck. Let's go right into the game so that you guys can see a little bit of this in practice and see kind of how the deck rock and rolls. So our first game, we're playing against like a Revelation. I want to say it's a Wise Man loop deck. Our opponent G-Assist for grade 1 gets rid of 2 of their cards. Their hand is actually god-awful, but that really just sucks for them because our hand is, you know, really good. So we attack, and then we get a draw trigger, we draw. We attacked with our rearguard first to be conscious of our stand trigger in our deck, so always attack with rearguard first if you're rushing. I know that can hurt sometimes when you ride Princess Celtic, that's her name, and sometimes your opponent can take you, get a trigger, and you know, you just can't do much. But beyond that, you know, you'll do pretty well. So now we're just rushing our opponent for really big numbers. We attack, we bounce 2, and then we're able to call 1. But we're also able to use clear skill to search a grade 3. And then we attack, we drive check 2, our opponent just takes the damage. Not much to say about that. And then our opponent chooses not to ride up, which is actually very interesting. But they attack, they get a stand trigger, and then we guard their last one with a 10k. We take all the damage because obviously in Prisms, being at higher damage is just better. But we attack for 16, we check 2, then we attack for 18, our opponent takes it as well. So our opponent draws and they just concede because they don't want to ride Wise Man. Obviously we have 2 PGs in our hand, double G Guardian, like our opponent was not going to win that game if they chose to ride, and if they didn't ride, that was going to make it even worse for them because we just beat their face in the very next turn, and they wouldn't be able to guard. So our opponent concedes game 1 just because he got, I guess, a terrible hand. Game 2, we're playing against Murakumo. It looks like it's Shiryuki, which is pretty interesting. Like, it's been a while since I've seen a Shiryuki build. But we choose to eat the first damage. We attack, we get a draw trigger. On top of that, we use Princess Celtic skill to bounce and draw a card. He has to G-assist to 2. He gets rid of 2 cards. We take a damage. We ride Princess Emerald. And then we play a card to our board. We attack for 17. And then we attack for 18, you know, call 2 back, bounce, and give 4K. Our opponent guards for 2 to pass, so we check a heal and a grade 3. And then we attack, and they also get a heal, healing off a damage. So they ride Shiryuki and go into the Shiryuki stride, searching a Shiryuki to play the rearguard circle, and then at the end of the turn it bounces to hand, and they discard a card. So we ate the damage from both attacks just because we want to be as high damage as possible. Our opponent actually almost killed us because they double crit us, which we did not expect. But they did put us to 5 damage, which is even better because we're able to go immediately into Shining Garnet. And we chose the limit break of the heart card to steal. So everything gets plus 8K. And then we attack with one side for 27, 2 crit, takes 2 damage. And then we attack with 32, 2 crit. And our opponent uses Shiryuki skill to discard it and make us minus 20,000, but then they stop to guard for 5 more. So then we attack with Vanguard, and we use the skill to bounce 2, call 1. And then we use the skill of our crit trigger to put it back and check something else. So then, because we put our crit back, we just checked it again, of course, and then we attack with a lot of crit. And our opponent can't stride because they don't have the necessary cards in hand. So they just attack us for 12, then 18. We G-guard into a no-pass with Leona. We use the skill of Princess Late to give 4K to Vanguard for the rest of the turn. And then our opponent attacks, we guard with a 5K, we stride, we go into Shining Garnet again. Shining Garnet steals the skill of Glitter. And then all of our cards get plus 8. So we attack with 27, 2 crit, and our opponent takes it. They just couldn't eat an attack that big, like 2 turns in a row. It's actually really hard for your opponent to try to get around that, especially if we force them into a scenario first stride where they have to top deck to get out of their situation, because if they don't top deck, it makes it that much worse for them. And even if they can top deck, it's very rare that they can go into a stride that can actually save them from just completely losing anyways. So then we have game 3. We're actually playing against Coral, deck that I hate the most. You guys know this if you follow this channel a lot. I just hate Coral with a passion because this deck's too freaking good. But our opponent doesn't ride the grade 1, so that's a good start for us. But they do check a trigger. So we attack, we get a draw trigger. We've been getting a draw trigger on like turn 2 in like every game, which is insane considering that we only run 4, but you know, it is what it is, I guess. Our opponent's grade 2 hits, so we do attack with Princess Celtic, being able to bounce a card and draw a card. We check nothing, and then we check nothing for the, or they check nothing for the third attack. They use a bunch of skills, and they play cards on the board. They use the crit trigger, top 5. For a Coral card, they whiff it, and then the front row gets plus 5. And then they use the skill of their stride. They attack our rearguard for 16, we guard. They attack our Vanguard for 20, bounce, and call a card. And then they use the skill to call a Speak Up back. So they attack for 17, using popping to double the power, and then we PG the Vanguard. And then they get a stand trigger, which I was like, wow. And then we guard that as well. So we are limit break 4 still. So we choose to use the skill of Garnet and also steal the limit break 4 ability. We use the skill to make the limit break 5 a limit break 4. And then we attack for 2 crit. Our opponent takes 2 damage, hits 2 triggers. We counterboss 1, bounce. And we draw. And then we attack with Vanguard, bouncing 2, calling 1. We get a stand trigger, which is pretty good just because the plus 8 continuous is just very good. Our opponent checking 2 triggers didn't really help there, but our opponent does go into Frontier Star Coral here. So we are actually forced into a really bad random situation where we have to try to guard everything. I tried to no guard both because I knew that this was going to attack twice, this was going to attack once, and then this was going to attack and reset the board. So without a PG, there's no possible way that I could have survived that turn. So we just decided to take the damage, and if we didn't 6 damage heal, just take the L there. Summary, Coral is too strong of a deck. That deck should be banned. But yeah, that has been the Prism deck, the Prism Future Fight. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, be sure to leave a like on the video. It helps a lot more than you guys think. Also, if you want to subscribe, stay updated with the channel, feel free to click the subscribe button, and also click the bell button next to it to stay updated and get notifications whenever the videos go live. Check out our social medias down below. I like to post a lot of things on the Cardfight Empire Facebook page, especially about updates about what's going on if I'm at a tournament, if I'm out of town, what's going on with the videos, things like that, so you guys can keep updated through there. And then you can just check out the rest of our social medias, which will be our Instagram and our Twitter alongside the Facebook. And then if you are interested in supporting the channel a little more than liking and subscribing, you can check out our Patreon and our merch store. But with that being said, this has been Josh from Cardfight Empire, and I'll see you guys on the next video. Peace out.